The sun was slowly setting behind the wide Arizona desert, spreading a warm orange light across the land. The wind moved softly through the dry grass, carrying the sound of distant birds. A cowboy named Luke Carson rode quietly on his brown horse, Dusty. Luke was a tall man with kind eyes, a strong heart, and hands that had known hard work all his life. He wasn't rich or famous, but he was respected by everyone who knew him. People said Luke had a good soul, the kind that never turned away from someone in need. Luke had spent the whole day working with cattle, fixing fences, and checking on the water wells around his small ranch. It had been another long, tiring day, and he was thinking about having some beans and coffee when he got home. But as he rode across the open land, something strange caught his attention. Far away, beyond a line of rocky hills, he saw a thin trail of smoke rising into the sky. It didn't look like a campfire. It was too thick and dark. Luke stopped his horse, his eyes narrowing. Then he heard it, faint cries carried by the wind. It was distant, but he was sure of it. Someone was in trouble. Luke's heart began to beat faster. The desert wasn't a safe place. There were wild animals, bandits, and people who would harm others without a second thought. He could have ignored it and gone home pretending he hadn't seen anything. But that wasn't Luke's way. He had lived by a simple rule his whole life. If someone needed help, you help them no matter what it costs. He turned his horse toward the smoke and urged it forward. The desert air grew heavier and the smell of burnt wood filled the air. As he got closer, Luke saw an overturned wagon near the edge of a rocky canyon. Its wooden wheels were broken and supplies were scattered everywhere. He slowed down and listened carefully. Then he heard it again, soft whimpers like children crying. Luke quietly dismounted his horse and walked closer. Behind the broken wagon, he saw two small Apache girls, no older than 10 or 12. Their clothes were torn and their faces were covered in dust. One of them held the other protectively, her eyes filled with fear. They looked at Luke as if unsure whether he was friend or enemy. Before Luke could speak, he heard rough voices not far away. Outlaws. They were laughing and shouting near the rocks. From their voices, Luke could tell they were proud of what they had done, and that made his blood run cold. He peeked around a boulder and saw them. 3 men, dirty and careless, going through what was left of the wagon. They hadn't seen the girls hiding behind it, and they didn't know Luke was there. Luke knew he was just 1 man against 3. But that didn't matter. He couldn't walk away. He whispered to his horse to stay quiet, then carefully reached for his old Winchester rifle. The metal felt cool in his hands. He took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the rock. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice steady and strong. The outlaws turned in surprise. The sight of the lone cowboy with a rifle in his hand stopped them cold. Luke didn't fire. He didn't need to. His eyes were enough to show he meant every word when he said, "Leave now." The men exchanged nervous glances. They weren't used to someone standing up to them. The desert wind blew dust between them as the moment hung heavy. Finally, one of them spat on the ground and muttered, "Ain't worth it," before they climbed onto their horses and rode off. Luke stayed still until the sound of hooves faded into the distance. Then he lowered his rifle and turned toward the wagon. The 2 girls were still there, staring at him. He took off his hat and spoke softly. "It's all right now. You're safe." At first, the girls didn't move. They didn't understand his words, but they understood his tone. It was gentle, the voice of someone who meant no harm. Slowly, the older girl stepped out, still holding the younger one's hand. She looked up at Luke with cautious eyes. Luke smiled kindly. "You must be hungry," he said, kneeling down to their level. He pulled out his water canteen and offered it to them. They hesitated, then took it, drinking greedily. The older one nodded as if to say thank you. Luke noticed the younger girl was limping. Her ankle looked swollen and she winced whenever she tried to step on it. Without saying anything, Luke carefully lifted her up into his arms. She was light as a feather. He placed her gently on his horse, then helped the older girl climb up behind her. The sun had nearly disappeared by now, and the first stars were appearing in the deep purple sky. Luke led the horse by the reins as they began the long walk back to his cabin. The desert at night was quiet, except for the sound of their slow footsteps and the distant cry of coyotes. The older girl looked at the stars as they walked, whispering something in her native tongue. Luke didn't understand the words, but he could tell she was praying, maybe thanking the spirits for sending someone to save them. After nearly 2 hours of walking, The small cabin finally appeared in the distance. It wasn't much, just a single room with a wooden porch and a chimney, but it was warm and safe. Luke opened the door, lit the lamp, and guided the girls inside. The glow from the fire painted the room in soft light. He gave them food, some beans, cornbread, and water, and watched as they ate quietly. They were shy, but every now and then they looked at him with gratitude in their eyes. Luke didn't ask questions about what had happened. He could see enough from their faces. They had lost something, maybe everything. When they finished eating, Luke spread an old blanket on his bed for them to sleep on. "You can rest here," he said softly. The girls looked at each other, then nodded. They lay down close together, their eyes finally closing after a long, terrifying day. Luke sat near the fireplace, staring at the flames as he cleaned his rifle. He wasn't angry, just thoughtful. The desert had always been full of danger, but it also had a strange way of testing a man's heart. Tonight he had been tested and he had done what was right. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing softly against the cabin walls. Luke listened to it for a long time, thinking about the two girls sleeping peacefully behind him. He didn't know who they were or where they came from, but he felt a deep sense of responsibility toward them. As he looked out the window at the endless dark horizon, Luke whispered to himself, "You did good today." But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. Something about the way the girls had appeared, out of nowhere, in the middle of nowhere, made him feel like fate had brought them into his life for a reason. That night, Luke slept lightly by the door with his hat pulled down over his eyes, his rifle within reach. The fire burned low, casting a warm glow over the small room. Outside, the stars shone brighter than ever, watching over the quiet cabin, and somewhere out there, beyond the desert hills, a figure was already looking for those two girls. A mother who would soon find out what Luke had done for her children. When morning came, Luke's life would change forever. The morning sun slowly rose over the Arizona desert, lighting up the sand and turning the sky into shades of pink and gold. Luke Carson was already awake. He had always been an early riser, but this morning felt different. The two little Apache girls were still sleeping soundly on his bed, wrapped up in a warm blanket. Their faces looked peaceful now, no longer frightened like the night before. Luke smiled quietly to himself as he brewed a pot of coffee over the fire. The smell filled the cabin, mixing with the cool morning air. It reminded him that life, even in the toughest places, could still be gentle. He stepped outside, letting the fresh air touch his face. The desert stretched endlessly around him, calm and quiet as if nothing bad had ever happened. He walked to the small water trough near his cabin and filled a bucket for his horse. Dusty nickered softly as if thanking him. Luke patted the horse's neck. "You did good, old boy," he said softly. "Real good." After feeding the horse, Luke returned inside. The girls were awake now. The younger one sat up first, rubbing her sleepy eyes, while the older one helped her fix her hair. They looked shy but happy to see Luke. He smiled warmly and said, "Good morning." They didn't understand the words, but they could feel his kindness. He offered them some breakfast, biscuits and honey with warm milk. They ate quietly, stealing small glances at him now and then. The older girl suddenly pointed toward the door and said something in her language. Her tone sounded hopeful, like she was telling him that someone would come. Luke nodded. "Your family?" he asked, pointing toward the horizon. The girl nodded quickly. Her eyes brightened. That was a good sign. Luke felt relief. Maybe their family had survived or were nearby. He decided to wait with them until someone came. Hours passed slowly. The desert sun climbed higher and the air grew warm. Luke stayed outside, chopping some wood while keeping an eye on the road. From time to time, the girls would peek through the door to watch him work. They smiled shyly whenever he waved at them. By late afternoon, Luke saw something in the distance, a group of riders approaching. His hand instinctively moved toward his rifle, but then he noticed the riders were not outlaws. They were Apaches, moving calmly and with purpose. The girls ran outside excitedly, waving their hands. Luke lowered his guard and stepped forward. The riders stopped a short distance from the cabin. At the front was a woman dressed in traditional Apache clothing, her long black hair braided neatly, her eyes filled with strength and wisdom. She dismounted gracefully, and when the girls ran to her, she knelt down and held them tightly. The moment was quiet but full of emotion. A mother's relief, a mother's love. Luke stood silently, giving them space. He could feel the emotion even though no words were spoken. After a while, the woman stood up and looked at him. Her expression was calm but serious. She spoke a few words in her language, and one of the men beside her, likely a translator, and stepped forward. He said, "She is the mother of the girls. They were taken when outlaws attacked their camp. She has searched for them since last night." Luke nodded respectfully. "I just found them near the canyon," he said. "I did what anyone would have done." The translator spoke her words again. The woman listened carefully, then placed her hand over her heart and said something soft but meaningful. The translator smiled. She says, "You are a man of great spirit. You saved her children. For that she is thankful." Luke smiled, tipping his hat. "They were brave girls," he said kindly. "You should be proud." The mother looked at him again, her eyes thoughtful. After a moment, she said something else, this time with a firm tone. The translator hesitated before repeating it. She says, "You are to be rewarded. Whatever you ask for, she will give." Luke was surprised. He shook his head quickly. "No reward," he said. "I didn't do it for that." The translator told her what he said, but the woman frowned slightly and replied again. Her words came out strong and certain. The translator looked at Luke, almost embarrassed. She says, "You will not leave without a gift. She wants to repay your kindness in the way of her people." Luke was quiet for a moment. He didn't want anything from her, but he could see in her eyes that refusing would hurt her pride. Finally, he smiled and said gently, "Then tell her this. Her children's smiles are enough reward for me." The translator spoke, and for a moment, the woman seemed touched. She looked at Luke deeply, as if studying his soul. Then she took off a beautiful handmade necklace from around her neck, a string of turquoise and bone beads, and walked toward him. Luke didn't move. She stopped in front of him and slowly placed the necklace in his hand. "She says this belonged to her family," the translator said softly. "Now it belongs to you. You are a friend of her people." Luke held the necklace carefully, feeling its weight. It was simple but full of meaning. He looked at the woman and nodded respectfully. "Tell her I'll treasure it," he said quietly. The translator smiled and relayed the message. The woman nodded once, her expression proud and peaceful. The girls hugged Luke tightly before leaving. The younger one gave him a small feather she had tied around her wrist, as if giving him something special of her own. Luke took it and smiled warmly. "Thank you, little one," he said softly. As the Apache group rode away, the dust from their horses rose into the glowing light of the setting sun. Luke stood there watching until they disappeared behind the hills. The desert grew quiet again, peaceful and still. That evening, Luke sat on his porch holding the necklace in his hand. He thought about how strange life could be. One day you're just riding home from work, and the next you're saving lives and making friends you never expected. The desert, harsh as it was, had a way of bringing out the best in people when it mattered most. He looked up at the stars that night. The same stars he had seen every night of his life. But they seemed to shine brighter now. He felt something deep in his chest, not pride, but peace. He had done what was right, and somehow that had brought meaning to his quiet life. In the following days, Luke went back to his normal routine. He fixed fences, cared for his animals, and tended to his land. But sometimes, when the wind blew softly through the canyon, he thought he could hear the laughter of the two girls echoing in the distance. He would smile to himself, touching the necklace that now hung near his window. It reminded him that goodness never goes unnoticed, not by people, not by fate, and not by the world. And though he never saw the Apache family again, Luke knew that somewhere out there, they remembered him too. The cowboy who had risked his life to save two lost children in the heart of the desert. From that day forward, people in nearby towns told stories about the quiet cowboy who stood against danger with courage and kindness. Some said he was blessed by the spirits. Others said he was just a man with a good heart. But Luke never cared about the talk. For him, the reward had already been given. The moment he saw those two little girls safe in their mother's arms, smiling at him one last time before riding away. And every evening, as the sun sank behind the golden hills, Luke Carson would look at the horizon and whisper to himself, "That's what life's about, doing the right thing when it counts."